How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today we've got a slightly different video for you. So instead of the normal battle video, what I'm doing today is I'm going to do a quick, well, it's probably not going to be that quick, it's going to be quite a long video, but as quick as I can make it, guide to the new Series 10 format that was announced last week. So before we get started, this video has taken a fair bit of time for me to make, so if you enjoy it, please do show some support by leaving a like, sub to the channel, just to let me know that this is content that people are interested in, that I should do again, because obviously I don't want to sink a whole bunch of time into content that people aren't interested in. So, to start with, if you don't know already, Series 10, which is the format starting at the beginning of August, you're allowed one restricted Pokemon, so it's a bit like Series 8, except no Dynamax is allowed, hence one restricted, zero max. So, what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to go over, first of all, some kind of general changes to how the game's going to be played, that are kind of not specific to any particular Pokemon, and then I'm going to do a rundown of some kind of key individual Pokemon, starting with what I think will be the strongest restricted Pokemon, and then I will go over the best non-restricted Pokemon in the format, and then I'm going to go over a few of the non-restricted Pokemon that I think have kind of improved quite significantly over Series 8, Series 9. So they're kind of Pokemon that you can maybe have a go at using if you're feeling a bit spicy. And then lastly, I will go over some common cores I reckon you're going to find in this format. Specifically, I'm going to focus on ones involving restricted Pokemon because like old cores from Series 9 will still exist. They'll just have a restricted Pokemon strapped to the back of them, so you'll still get the standard kind of Trick Room, Sun cores, stuff like that running around. So I'm just going to go over ones with restricted Pokemon, because I want to do new information. There's no point recycling old stuff. So I've tried to get into a lot of information into one video. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to leave them in the comments. I will try and answer all of them as quickly as I can. I understand that this is going to be a lot of stuff to take in, and I will miss some stuff out because I can't feasibly get all of that content and all of that information into one video. So yeah, feel free to leave any questions in the comments if you have any. So we're going to start off with kind of general changes to how the game's played. So first of all, in the format without Dynamax, there are a few things that become significantly better or significantly worse, right? The first one is Fake Out. Because obviously with Dynamax, Dynamax Pokemon can't be flinched, which meant that if you led a Fake Out Pokemon, there was always this kind of 50-50 game of will my opponent Dynamax to get around the Fake Out, that kind of thing. That doesn't exist anymore in this format. So Fake Out is now a lot stronger. There's no mind games with it or anything. You just get a free Fake Out onto whatever. Like, obviously there are still plays around Fake Out, but you don't have the element of Dynamax to stop it, which means Fake Out is going to be a lot stronger. By extension, Quick Guard I think is also going to be more viable again. I don't think you'll see it on too many Pokemon, but like the Pokemon like kind of Hitmontop, Talonflame may rise in popularity just because they have access to Quick Guards. They can block Fake Outs, which is pretty useful. Repositioning with stuff like U-Turn, Parting Shot, Volt Switch is going to be a lot more common now, and you'll see that reflected in what the most common non-restricted Pokemon in the format are, which I'll go over later. But because there's a lot more switching in a format without Dynamax, because obviously with Dynamax, once you Dynamax a Pokemon, you don't really want to switch that slot out, which means there's only really one slot going in and out on each side. Both sides are switching a lot more, so being able to react to that with a U-turn, a Parting Shot, and reposition is going to be very, very valuable. Even more so than it was before. Kind of a more minor one, but weight-based moves, such as Heavy Slam, Grass Knot, Low Kick, that kind of thing, they didn't work on Dynamax Pokemon. But obviously without Dynamax, those are now viable moves that you can run again. I don't know if a huge amount of Pokemon will run them, but I know in previous restricted formats, like Grass Knot, for example, has been quite common. Because against Pokemon like Kyogre, Groudon, these kind of big, heavy restricted Pokemon, it's a super effective base 120 power move. Encore as well didn't work on Dynamax Pokemon. You could switch moves if you Dynamaxed. If you got Encored whilst you were small, you could Dynamax and pick whatever max move you wanted. So that may see a bit of a rise. Can be used to punish things like Protect or Fake Out, the obvious ones. Setup moves also you can punish with it. So that's something to keep an eye out for. Wide Guard as well, similar category to Quick Guard, I think is going to make a return. As you'll see as we go over kind of the kind of big restricted Pokemon in the format, a lot of them have access to huge spread moves. And so Wide Guard is really useful for blocking stuff like kind of water spouts, astral barrages, that kind of thing. So that's definitely something you want to consider putting on your team if you're weak to any of that. Choice items as well are something that will probably see a bit more use. Because obviously when you Dynamaxed, any effective choice items were lost. You weren't locked into a move, but you didn't get the speed, attack, special attack boost that they gave you. So without max moves, you could see a few more choice Pokemon running around, like Scarf Kyogre is something that's always been relatively popular in these formats. But if you're running choice items, you do have to be very wary of Fake Out, because like I said, that's going to be a lot stronger, a lot more commonplace. And if you don't have access to Protect, then obviously it makes you a bit vulnerable to it. Substitute as well, the move may see a resurgence just because often you're wanting to run Substitute on Pokemon that are setting up, and often Pokemon that are setting up you want to Dynamax, but Dynamax got rid of Substitute, so that didn't really pop on many Pokemon. You occasionally saw it on, like, Zacian used it a lot, but obviously Zacian can't Dynamax, so expect Substitute Zacian around a lot. I know Calyrex Shadow as well used to run Substitute occasionally, but you may see that on a few more Pokemon. It's probably not going to be that common, but again, something just to look out for. Now some things that are going to get worse. Weakness policy sets. Weakness policy, I reckon, is going to all but disappear. Because with Dynamax, you're effectively taking half damage from a super effective attack, right? And so with like side proc stuff, look at Colossal is a good example of this. Colossal would take 25% probably from like a minimum special attack Dragapult Surf. But without Dynamax, obviously you don't have that same option because that Surf is now doing half to your Colossal. Just an example. And also Pokemon like Glastria, who could just rely on being very, very bulky to Dynamax and hope to eat a super effective hit to proc their policy, or just use it as a deterrent for other Pokemon from hitting it with super effective moves. That's now no longer going to be a thing because you just don't have the bulk to kind of deliberately bait super effective attacks into yourself. This is a bit speculative, I'm not 100% sure on this one, but moves like Eerie Impulse that drop stats might be a bit less effective or a bit less common in a format where like you're kind of switching around a lot, you're pivoting a lot. Because a lot of the appeal of stuff like Eerie Impulse Charm was that if you caught someone Dynamaxing with an Eerie Impulse, then you just wasted their Dynamax, which was huge. Whereas you don't have quite that same reward off it in this format. And then some Pokemon that rely heavily on Dynamax will drop in use. Things like Dragapult, don't expect to see much of, because obviously, like Dragon Darts is a good stab move, but then like Phantom Force and Fly were the other two moves that are often used, and those aren't particularly good. It kind of needed max moves to be effective. I think Colossal, like I said earlier, like that's not going to go anywhere without Dynamax. Physical Offensive Thundurus is going to drop off. You no longer have to play the like, oh, is this Defiant or Prankster Thundurus, because they're all going to be Prankster now. If you see a Thundurus in this format, it's Prankster. So those are some of the more general changes. So now we're going to move on to looking at some more specific kind of key restricted Pokemon. Starting with what I think will be the most common ones. The obvious one is Zacian. This thing is going to be the king of the format. It's broken. It's stupid. It's got ridiculous stats. I think it has the highest base stat total of any Pokemon in the game, which is ridiculous. Steel Fairy is amazing typing. Its ability gives it a free +1 attack boost when it enters the field. It's got a drawback-free base 100 stab move in Behemoth Blade. It's insanely fast. Like its base 148 outspeeds Dragapult for some reason. It's also way bulkier than it has any right to be. You'd think with that attack stat and that speed stat it would be kind of frail, but no, it's got I think 90 base HP and 115 in each of its defenses, which is comparable to something like Suicune. I think Suicune is 100, 115, 115. And that's known as like one of the bulkiest Pokemon in the game, and Zacian has a very similar bulk. So this thing is very, very difficult to stop. It's got options for setting up as well, for like Swords Dance, Substitute, that kind of thing. So if it gets the Swords Dance up, everything's dead. If it gets the sub up, it's very difficult to hit. You can't fake it out, you can't intimidate it. It's a very, very scary Pokemon. Standard sets are, like I said, going to be the Swords Dance or Substitute with Protect, and then most commonly you're going to see Behemoth Blade, and then either Close Combat or Sacred Sword. Generally they run Steel and Fighting, but sometimes they'll run Wild Charge or Play Rough instead of Swords Dance or Sub. But it'll almost always be Behemoth Blade, a fighting move, Protect, and then, yeah, the last one's not necessarily like a filler slot, but it's a bit more flexible. In terms of checks and counters to this thing, there aren't a huge amount, I'm going to be honest. Intimidate's really good into it, particularly Incineroar. Landorus is also a decent Intimidate user into it, because it can hit it with super effective ground moves, but being neutral to Steel does mean that it can't switch in on Zacian very often. I think it can probably switch in once, and then it's done for. Obviously, Incineroar doesn't appreciate taking fighting moves, but it's a bit easier to bring it in and out. Parting Shot off Zacian, it has, like, Incineroar also has access to Fake Out, so you get a lot more reward than just the Intimidate for pivoting with it. Speed control can also be really useful against Zacian, because it's so powerful and so fast. It gets a lot of benefit from moving first, because a lot of the time it can just, like, it'll knock out a Pokemon every turn and then the game's over. So if you can slow it down, or you can speed yourself up, think kind of Electrowebs, Tailwinds, if you can get Trick Room up, that's pretty handy to Zacian. Basically moving first just gives you a bit of an advantage over this, or less of a disadvantage. Defensive checks, mostly going to be things that resist Steel, but like I said, it runs fighting coverage a lot. So, like, Steel types maybe aren't so great into it. Fire types are generally quite good defensively against Zacian. It doesn't really have any coverage that's super effective on fire. Bulkier water types can check ones that don't have Wild Charge, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Wild Charge being quite common in this format, just because Kyogre's everywhere. In terms of partners for Zacian, if you're building around it, you want to, like, I put down here Wall Breakers for defensive checks. What I mean by that is things that can break down the defensive checks to Zacian, so things that can beat Incin, things that can beat Landorus and other Intimidate users, things that can beat bulky water types. Because if you can get rid of Zacian's defensive checks, it will run through teams. Pokemon that discourage or punish Intimidate are also useful, so things like competitive or defiant users, things like Urshifu that can crit through Intimidate drops, especially into Incineroar and Landorus if you're using Water Urshifu. Those kind of things are useful just to stop people from intimidating Zacian, and with competitive and defiant as well, it discourages, like, Electroweb. So it just makes it a bit more difficult to slow Zacian down. But, like, realistically, you can put Zacian on basically any team. Like, you're hard-pressed to find a set of 5 non-restricted Pokemon that aren't improved by just slapping a Zacian on there. This thing can go on, like, any team. You don't really need that much support for it. It just kind of does its own job. Next up is Xerneas. Xerneas is one that really wasn't very common in Series 8. It didn't like Dynamax in the slightest. But anyone who has played before Generation 8 in a restricted format will know what a terror this thing is. This is an interesting one, I think, for people who are newer to the game. I know a lot of people started competitive in Generation 8, so they won't have seen Xerneas around very much. But the key thing with Xerneas is it has access to possibly the best move in the game in Geomancy. What Geomancy does is it's a 2-turn move. It charges up on the first turn, and then on the second turn, you get +2 in special attack, special defense, and speed. Right, so it's basically 2 Quiver Dances straight away. But with a Power Herb, you can get that in 1 turn. So a lot of Xerneas teams will have Redirectional Fake Out next to it, and then it just threatens to go Geomancy on turn 1, and then from there it will destroy you. This thing has insanely powerful Fairy type attacks. It's got 131 special attack, which is pretty strong. It's also got an ability called Fairy Aura, which boosts the power of all Fairy moves on the field by 1/3. So that does include your opponent's Fairy attacks, but I mean, it's more of a benefit to Xerneas, certainly. So it's kind of like, it's a bit more than a free life orb boost on your stab attacks. It's also got decent bulk. It's quite hard to take down, especially on the special side. Once it gets a Geomancy up, obviously +2 special defense is quite hard to get through. The biggest downside of Xerneas, other than it requiring setup, is that it really doesn't have very much coverage, but it kind of doesn't need it. Reason being, between the 1.5 times boost it gets from Stab and the 1.33 times boost it gets from Fairy Aura, like, it doesn't have any coverage that can hit Steel types. So, for example, so the best thing it can hit Steel types with is like a Thunderbolt, but a resisted Moonblast still does more damage than a neutral Thunderbolt, so there's just not any point running coverage moves. Like, it doesn't have anything to hit Steel or Poison, which are the 2 things that resist Fairy. So most of the time you'll see, like, Moonblast, Dazzling Gleam, Geomancy, Protect as they're set on Xerneas. In terms of checks and counters, there aren't really any counters, but in terms of checks, like steel types are big. Poison types can also work, but there aren't as many of those. Generally, they hit on the special side rather than physical, which means they still don't do that much damage if Xerneas gets a Geomancy up. So like steel is generally your best option. Obviously, it resists Fairy Stab. It can hit back for physical super effective damage most of the time. It's also not nearly as threatening if it doesn't get set up. It still hits hard, don't get me wrong, like it will still hurt to get hit by a neutral Xerneas Moonblast. But if you can prevent or remove the setup in some way, it becomes a lot more manageable. So things like Taunt can stop it setting up. If it's already set up, things like Clear Smog and Amoonguss can be good into it. Haze, if you've got Pokemon with Haze on it, you can run that. Encore as well, like I was saying earlier, Encore can punish Geomancy, because if they Geomancy and you Encore them, they're then forced to Geomancy again, so they spend a turn charging up, and then they'll get another Geomancy boost, but then they're forced to either switch or spend another turn charging up. Because the thing is with Xerneas, it can only set up once per battle, because once it's expended its Power Herb, it can't really set up again. In terms of partners for Xerneas, like I said earlier, Redirection and Fake Out to help set up are going to be very common. Think like Amoonguss, Volcarona has seen a bit of play next to Xerneas as well. I think that's kind of the most common redirector next to it at the moment. Think Instant Rillaboom for Fake Out, that kind of thing. And it's a little bit obvious, but types that beat Steel and Poison, those are the only things that can really stop it once it's set up. So if you have Pokemon that can beat, I was going to say Instant, but Instant's less so. Things like kind of Ho-Oh, Entei can get in the way of it. In terms of fire resists, steel types like Celesteela, Ferrothorn. Poison there are fewer, but like if you can, I guess similar to Zacian, if you can get rid of its defensive checks, it puts you in a much stronger position. Next up we have Kyogre. Kyogre's a little bit of a one-trick pony, but the one trick it does is very, very good. Like, most Pokemon in the game that don't resist water are getting one-shot by a rain-boosted water spout, right? This will destroy your team. I've had many games with Kyogre where I've kind of played a kind of slow early game and then just got into a position where Kyogre is set up to press water spout and then won the game in 2 turns, because I'll knock out all 4 of their Pokemon with 2 attacks. The downsides of Kyogre, it's got very kind of middling speed. It's base 90, which isn't that quick. And so most of the time with Kyogre, because you want to be pressing Water Spout, you want to attack first. Because if you don't attack first, then you get hit by a move before you can Spout, and now your Spout's not doing nearly as much damage, right? So that's kind of one of the big downsides of Kyogre. You can get around that, obviously. I'll go over that in a sec. But that's the big downside. It can run a couple of items. I didn't go over item choices for the last 2 Pokemon because Xerneas is always going to be running Power Herb and Zacian's always going to be running Rusted Blade. But with Kyogre, the 2 most common items by far are Mystic Water, which just boosts the power of water type moves by 1.2 times, which is, it just makes it makes like Water Spouts and like Origin Pulse's Scalds even more ridiculous. Or you can run Choice Scarf, which kind of gets around the speed issue to an extent. I've seen Specs around, but to me personally, Specs feels like a bit of a kind of win more move. Like if you're in a position where you're pressing your Specs Water Spout with Kyogre, you probably could have won anyway. In terms of sets, always expect Water Spout, and then it'll normally have a secondary water attack. Usually that's either Origin Pulse or Scald, depending on like whether they want to be able to get around Wide Guard, whether they want a 100% accurate water type move, and then if they're not running Scarf or a choice item, they'll have Protect and then want to be the Ice Beam or Thunder usually, or if you're running Scarf, you have both of those. In terms of checks and counters to Kyogre, opposing weather, I say opposing weather if you're careful. What I mean by that is Pokemon that set weather, things like Torkoal, Groudon, Tyranitar, don't match up well into Kyogre, but the Pokemon they're setting up for can beat it. So I think on Sun, Venusaur does well into Kyogre. On Sand, like Dracozolt can beat it. So if you're running those Pokemon, if you play carefully, you can get around Kyogre by setting opposing weather. Because obviously that also weakens its Water Spout pretty significantly. Grass types as well, resist water, hit back super effectively. Rillaboom is very, very good in Kyogre because Priority Grassy Glide will one-shot it, and without the option to Dynamax you can't really do a huge amount about it, other than just like protecting for a turn. In terms of partners, you want speed control. Think Tailwind. You'll see Tornadus next to this a lot. I'll go over that in the kind of the common cores bit later. Regieleki, again, great speed control. Basically, you want to get Kyogre moving first, so that you can fire off water spouts. You'll also see Swifts and Muses next to it. Kingdra's decent, although I think significantly less consistent without Dynamax, because like in terms of water stabs, you can run Skull, but it's not doing that much damage. You can run Muddy Water or Hydro Pump, but those are both kind of inaccurate. And without the benefit of Max to guarantee hits, then you can't, like, it's not that reliable. Like Draco Meteor is a good Dragon Stab, but you obviously, once you've done it once, you kind of have to switch out because you've halved your special attack. Hurricane doesn't give you a speed boost anymore, you don't have max airstream, so I think Kingdra's a bit less effective. Ludicolo I think could be quite good, just because it gives you a very fast fake out. Because obviously Swiftwind boosted Ludicolo is going to be the fastest thing in the format, barring other like weather abusers. So it gives you a very, very fast fake out, gives you speed control and Icy Wind if you want to run something like that. The other thing that you often see run next to Kyogre is Pokemon that are weak to fire, like Steel types, Grass types, because they appreciate having the Rain up to mitigate their fire weakness. I know a lot of Rain teams have run things like kind of Scizor. I don't know how good Scizzor's actually going to be this format, but like Ferrothorn, Kartana, that kind of stuff. Just because the Rain helps to mitigate their fire weaknesses. Next up, Shadow Calyrex. This thing is like kind of it's a glass cannon. It's very high special attack, very fast. The crucial thing is that it's faster than Zacian. One of two relevant Pokemon that is, the other being Regieleki. So that's very useful. If your team's weak to Zacian and you're running like Hyper Offense or something, this is an option that you can run. This thing doesn't beat Zacian 1v1, but it's an option to outspeed and pick it off. Astral Barrage is a really good signature move. 0 drawbacks, 120 base power, spread move. I think it's personally, like, I personally think it's ridiculous. If you look at the kind of the moves from Gen 6 that they gave to the weather Pokemon, like Origin Pulse and Precipice Blades, same base power, no like added effects or anything, but 85 accuracy, and those are balanced moves. I think Astral Barrage is dumb. And it can also run Expanding Force if you're running it next to Indeedee, which is again 120 base power stab if you're in Psychic Terrain, with spread damage plus terrain boost as well, so that hits ridiculously hard. The downside of Calyrex is that it has very poor coverage. With Dynamax it can get away with running like Mud Shot, Hyper Beam, that kind of thing, so that when it maxed it could use like Max Quake, Max Strike. But obviously those aren't good moves outside of Dynamax. I mean, Mud Shot's barely a good move inside of Dynamax. So it's not really got any coverage to work with. But resisted hits can still hit very hard coming off this thing's special attack stat, especially with like a Life Orb. And if it gets 1 or 2 KOs, its ability Grimnay gives it a special attack boost every time it KOs something, so that can let it snowball. Once it picks up 1 or 2 KOs, it'll probably wipe your team if you don't deal with it very quickly. You can run a few sets, but normally what you're going to see is you're going to see Protect, Astral Barrage, a Psychic move, which will be either Psychic or Psyshock, or Expanding Force if you're running it next to Indeedee. And then the last slot is probably either Nasty Plot, could be Substitute. I've seen Trick Room in Prison, but I don't think that's that good, just because Calyrex is quite frail, and you don't really want to waste your restricted Pokemon on just stopping Trick Room going up. In terms of items, expect Life Orb and Choice Specs, I think, will be the most common items, probably Life Orb more common. You can see Sash for survivability if a team's kind of leaning more heavily into setting Calyrex up, or if it wants to use it for Trick Room in Prison, you can see Sash on it. But yeah, that's the standard sets. In terms of checks, Dark types, just in general, they resist both of Calyrex's stabs. Well, it resists Ghost and is immune to Psychic. And without good coverage, Calyrex just can't really beat Dark types. So I'm not sure how good a place it has in the format at the moment, given that like Dark Urshifu's going to be everywhere, Incin's going to be everywhere. You could see some like Yveltal in places. So that kind of makes me think that Calyrex maybe doesn't have a great place in this format, but we'll see. Pokemon with good special bulk, or Assault Vest Pokemon, they're not like hard counters, because this thing does still hit hard enough that it can kind of 2 or 3 shot a lot of Assault Vest users, but things like Ho-Oh, for example, with massive special defense, could take this thing on relatively well. And then Wide Guard, I say specifically for Calyrex, because, like I said, generally it's set to it's going to be next to Indeedee, and you're going to see Astral Barrage and Expanding Force. So its only attacking moves are spread moves, assuming Psychic Terrain is up, which means that Wide Guard can just kind of shut it down. Obviously with Dynamax they have the option to go big and hit you with a single target max move, but Wide Guard kind of stops this thing pretty hard. In terms of partners, you often want Redirection to help the setup, keep it alive. I highlighted Indeedee because that gives it Psychic Terrain for Expanding Force. You also want like Fighting Fairy type something. You need a back end with Calyrex Shadow that can beat Dark types, because otherwise, like, this thing just can't beat Dark types by itself. So you need good answers to those in the back. Like I said, the key ones to beat Urshifu and Incin. So like fighting types can deal with them. Your own Urshifu is pretty good next to Calyrex. Fairy type you can run next to it, like Feeny, Tapu Koko, something like that. Those are all options. Next up we have Groudon, the next of the Weather Duo. Groudon tends to run, like, it's got pretty much the same stat block as Kyogre, except with the physical and special stats switched. So same speed, same HP, but attack and special attack are switched, defense and special defense are switched. But I think that works more in Groudon's favour in terms of bulk. Firstly, because like there are a lot of physical threats in this format, and I think having physical bulk is very, very useful. Secondly, the most common weakness it has on its special side is water types, and its ability Drought sets up the sun, which halves the damage of water type moves, which is super, super useful. Twitch Laser is a great attack, a little bit inaccurate. It's got okay coverage in Rock Slide and Fire Punch, so it's got like Edgequake coverage, which is kind of what people call the combination of ground and rock. It gives you neutral coverage against pretty much everything. Fire Punch is sun boosted, which is kind of nice. It can run Heavy Slam now if it wants to. Ground is very, very heavy, so Heavy Slam will have base 120 power against most Pokemon in the game. It can run Swords Dance to set up. I think that's going to be a very common set. You'll see like Protect, Swords Dance, Fire Punch, and Precipice Blades. I think it'll be quite common, or Precipice Blades and Rock Slide. You can run a variety of items. Life Orb I've seen a few times. That's picked up in popularity in Series 10. White Herb to get around Intimidates. Wide Lens, if you're running Precipice Blades and Rock Slide, Wide Lens can be nice just to give you a bit more security in terms of hitting attacks. I ran Wide Lens Groudon in Series 8, and I really enjoyed it. A lot of people will tell you it's not very good, but I disagree. We'll see how well it does in this format, but that's an option. Or if you want a bit more defensive, you can go Assault Vest on this thing. I've seen that a few times. Patched up its weaker special defense stat. Or you can run like Citrus Berry if you're trying to set up with Swords Dance. Lets you just tank a couple of hits. In terms of checks and counters, particularly Rain, like opposing weather can beat it, but Rain in particular is a very difficult matchup for Groudon. Because obviously Kyogre, if it outspeeds, will just destroy it with a water attack. Its coverage moves outside of Precipice Blades aren't that strong, barring maybe like Heavy Slam. So things that resist ground can often be pretty decent checks to Groudon, although some of them like Celesteela has to look out for like Fire Punch. Flying types have to look out for Rock Slide. But like Pokemon with Levitate, for example, are good into Groudon. I think Rotom Wash just kind of hardballs it. Just kind of feeds into my next point of like bulky water types. They can sponge up attacks. Like if you can find something that doesn't get like two-shot by Precipice Blades, then that can be useful because you can hit Groudon back with water attacks. In terms of partners, Sun Abusers, I put Charizard down here. I don't think it's going to be very common in this format at all. It's kind of bad without Dynamax. Like the bigger allure of Charizard was you could go G-Max Wildfire and just destroy anything and like actually live a hit with G-Max because of the added bulk. So I don't expect to see Charizard very often, but like it's there. You don't want to have like an auto lose matchup to it, but don't expect to see it very often. I won't worry too much. The key ones are Venusaur and Lilligant, both which have Chlorophyll, which doubles their speed in Sun. Venusaur and Lilligant play similar roles. Venusaur is generally more offensive because of its move pool. It gets poison coverage, it gets Earth Power. So often Venusaur will run next to it like a Life Orb or something to clear out water types. Lilligant's more supportive generally. So Lilligant gets like After You is a big one because Groudon's speed's kind of mid. So it can go like because it's so fast in Sun, it can go After You on Groudon, so Groudon effectively moves first. It gets Helping Hand. What else did it get? I'm sure I took notes on what else it got, but I can't find them anywhere. But yeah, so Lilligant's kind of more supportive, Venusaur's more offensive. I think Venusaur's probably going to be more common than Lilligant still, but you have to look out for Lilligant. Speed control is useful on next to Groudon, but not as necessary as for something like Kyogre, because like I said, you can use your kind of more supportive weather partners to kind of put things to sleep before they can attack Groudon, or Lilligant go after you. So it's kind of less important, I think, for Groudon than it is for others, but it's still nice to have. Means of increasing its bulk, because Groudon is so bulky, and you tend to run kind of slower, bulkier sets on this thing than you do on something like Kyogre. Having up Light Screen or Intimidate, Snarl, Parting Shot, that kind of stuff, just to give Groudon more survivability is kind of useful, I think. Just to kind of lean into its bulk a bit. Especially if you're running like a Citrus Berry set or whatever. Next Pokemon up, and the last restricted Pokemon I'm going to go over in depth is Calyrex Ice. So this thing has insane stats. Like, it's got 50 speed, but then its offenses and its defensive stats are insane. This thing's got, like, I think 100 base HP and then 150 defense and 130 special defense. It's absurd. Its stats are ridiculous. Glacial Lance is a stupid move. For some reason, it's stronger than Astral Barrage. I don't know why, but it's 130 rather than 120. Ice is a great offensive type. This thing gets good coverage with Heavy Slam for steel, close combat for fighting, high horsepower for ground. Lets it hit most things at least neutrally. It can set up with Swords Dance as well, which is kind of scary. It's one of few Pokemon that can both set up Trick Room and Sweep in it, especially with Chilling Neigh. If it gets into the right position and Trick Room starts picking up 1 or 2 KOs, it can snowball through you very, very hard, because it's now got a base 130 power spread ice move that gives it a boost every time it knocks something out. The downsides of Calyrex, I think, particularly when compared with Series 8, is because its defensive type is not very good. In Series 8, it could almost kind of rely on that to run a weakness policy set, and then hope that someone hits it with a super effective attack. With Dynamax and this thing's bulk, it can normally take, like when it's Dynamaxed, it can take 2 or 3 super effective attacks, whereas without Dynamax, it can only take 1, basically. So weakness policy sets aren't going to be around. It can't really abuse its defensive typing the same way it did. So that's kind of one of the big weaknesses. In terms of sets to run, this thing's got a bit of a variety in the sets it can run. You can see Life Orb, which could run like kind of Trick Room Protect, Heavy Slam, Glacial Lance. White Herb would probably run similar. Or you could run like 3 attacks Trick Room. You could run 2 attacks Swords Dance Protect. You could run 3 attacks Swords Dance, 2 attacks Swords Dance Trick Room. There's a lot of kind of variety, but generally it's going to be Glacial Lance, and then the next 3 slots will be some combination of Heavy Slam, Close Combat, High Horsepower, Trick Room, Swords Dance. Or it could run an Assault Vest set to patch its, in quotations, weaker special defense stat. It's still absurd. But that just makes it absurdly bulky, especially if you run it next to something like Incineroar or other Intimidate users to drop opponents' attacks as well. This thing is really thick. Checks and counters, Intimidate is the obvious one, particularly Incineroar resists ice. It can parting shot off it and just keep pivoting, keep dropping its attack. Slower Pokemon under Trick Room. This thing's base 50 speed, so it's good under Trick Room, but there are a lot of Pokemon that are slower than it that can one-shot it. Things like Torkoal, I think, is going to be one of the more common Pokemon in this format. Something like a Alolan Marowak, if people are running that, can do it. Stack Attacker as well, underspeeds it in Trick Room and can one-shot it with Steel moves. Another way to get around it is going in the other direction, stopping Trick Room from going up, because obviously it's only base 50 speed. Most things outspeed it outside of Trick Room. So it's kind of hard for Calyrex to get speed control a lot of the time, which is one of its big weaknesses. Other checks to it, ice resistances. So like I said, it normally runs ice and like either 1 or 2 coverage moves. It can't hit everything. And its neutral attacks are strong, but like they're a lot easier to deal with than Glacial Lance. So things that resist ice, particularly I think like kind of Fire and Steel, need to be wary of like high horsepower and close combat. Bulky water types, it can't hit them super effectively. That's pretty useful for trying to play around it defensively. In terms of partners, things things to help it set up Trick Room or Sword Stance, so like redirection within DD, blocks Fake Out, pretty much guarantees you'll get a Trick Room up, barring a few niche circumstances. Then other Trick Room setters are really useful for Calyrex, because often what Calyrex wants to do is it wants to come in once Trick Room's already up, and then from there just sweep with Glacial Lance. It becomes a little bit more vulnerable if you have to set up Trick Room yourself, so having other Pokemon on the team that can set up Trick Room for it, and then have it come in the back end, can make it a lot easier to sweep with. You also want things to beat Steel and Fire types, because those are going to be hitting it for super effective damage. So you need to be very careful of those, especially Incineroar. You need an answer for Incineroar if you're running Calyrex. Or multiple, in fact. So I'm now going to move on to a few honourable mentions. The Pokemon I've mentioned already, I'd say make up kind of the S tier for the first tier and the A tier for the next three. The next one's going to go over a kind of like not S or A tier, but maybe like kind of B tier-ish. They still have, I think, a solid place in the metagame, but they're not going to be nearly as popular, I don't think. You may see people kind of exploring them early metagame, but I think they're not gonna hold as well as the early ones. So I'll go over these ones a bit more briefly. I know I've spent a lot of time talking about the early ones. First of all, Ho-Oh. This thing's very bulky, great special bulk. It has Regenerator as an ability, which recovers a third of its health every time it switches out. It has Recover, which is really good. It has Sacred Fire, which can burn physical threats, which kind of gives it like pseudo bulk. Has good matchups into a few other restricted Pokemon, particularly the special attacking ones, like Xerneas. This thing has such huge special defense that Xerneas really doesn't want to run into it because it resists Fairy. Calyrex Shadow it does decently into. Does very well into Zacian as well. It's got to be careful of Wild Charge, which probably one-shots it. I haven't done the calc on that one. But any Zacian sets that aren't running Wild Charge, Ho-Oh can do well into. But I think it's got a lot of downsides. First of all, its speed tier is not great, so even something like Calyrex, if Calyrex gets into the right position, will still probably beat it in a 1v1, or even Zacian to an extent will beat it in a 1v1. Something is its move pool is very weird, because with its bulk, you maybe want to try and run a support set, but it doesn't really have any support options, and its only offensive attacks are like Brave Bird and Sacred Fire. So it can't really effectively run either support or offense, which I think puts it in a very weird space. Like it doesn't have the same immediate power as a lot of other Pokemon. Like if you think of the 6 Pokemon already listed, those things will come in and they will hit you immediately if you don't deal with them. Like Kyogre will hit you with a Water Spout, Zacian will Behemoth Blade you, Xerneas will set up a Geomancy and go nuts. You've got a couple of Pokemon there that can nasty plot or can just hit you immediately. Whereas Ho doesn't have that setup potential. It doesn't have the same immediate power. Doesn't have any like broken moves that will one-shot anything in the format. It also struggles to deal with a lot of key Pokemon. Like Incineroar, it has a terrible matchup into. Like I said, it has no way of setting up or mitigating the attack drops from Intimidate and Parting Shot. Can't really get around Fake Out. Urshifu and Landorus, particularly Water Urshifu, it's slower than. Urshifu will one-shot it with Surging Strikes, Landorus will one-shot it with Rock Slide. So there's a lot of kind of very common Pokemon that beat Ho-Oh, which is why I think it's not going to be that great. But it's still a solid Pokemon, like it's not unusable, and I think you do need to make sure you have something to beat it. But it's not going to be everywhere, certainly. In terms of sets, usually you'll see defensive items on this thing. It's not good enough, I think, to run a pure offensive set. So much as like a bulky offense, so expect like Figgy or Citrus Berry, maybe Leftovers. Maybe like Safety Goggles if you want to see it as a Sun answer, but I think there's better options for that. That's kind of the sets you're going to see on it. Yveltal, good stats, same stat block as Xerneas, so if you want it to be, it's faster than Urshifu if you invest in speed. It's got 131 in each of attack and special attack. It's got good HP, decent defenses. Dark Aura is the same as Fairy Aura, but for dark moves, which means Yveltal, because obviously you're not setting up with it, you often don't invest as much in its offensive stats, but Dark Aura means it still hits pretty hard, even without much investment. It's got a good support move pool. It's got Taunt, Snarl, Tailwind. It's got a couple of others that I can't remember off the top of my head. It's got Priority and Sucker Punch. It's got Recovery with Oblivion Wing. It's not the best recovery in the world. It's not as good as like Recover or Roost or whatever, but it's some recovery. I think the big downside of Yveltal is 2 of the 3 most common restrictions in the format are Fairy types, and this thing does not like Fairy types at all. Like Xerneas destroys this. Zacian also destroys it. It can't really hit Zacian for anything. I think it also risks being a bit too passive. Without Dynamax, I don't expect to see any offensive Yveltal sets running around. Dynamax gave it a niche in that regard, because you could run like Max Airstream, or you could go for like Dark Aura boosted Max Darknesses, which would knock out a lot of stuff. But without that, you're probably not going to see any offensive sets, or at least not many. And the defensive sets can often be a bit passive. Like I said, if you're in front of like a Zacian, or honestly a lot of physical attackers, to be honest, like what you can hit them with a Snarl. It'll do some damage, but it's not a huge amount of damage. Like, you can Sucker Punch isn't doing that much. It can be a little bit passive in situations where like Taunt and Snarl aren't that useful, which I think you need to be careful of. It can run a lot of items though. It's got a good kind of selection of items that it's effective with. Assault Vest was a big one, particularly in Series 8. So with Assault Vest you can see something like Sucker Punch, Oblivion Wing, Snarl, and like Heat Wave or Dark Pulse or whatever. Black Glasses just to boost dark moves. Lefties if you're going bulky. Recovery Berries, I can see like Wackenberry being run on it to get around Regieleki. Could be interesting. So that's kind of what to expect from Yveltal. Next up we have the Gen 4 Legendaries. I put these in here, but upon reflection I kind of don't know if they necessarily deserve to be in here. I don't know if they're necessarily strong enough to have a big place in the format. Dialga's got great defensive typing. As I've said here, it's one of the few dragon types that isn't weak to fairy. Gets access to Trick Room, so you can run it on like Trick Room hybrid teams if you want to, because it's got like base 90 speed, so you can run it so that you can set up Trick Room if you need to, otherwise it can outspeed stuff. Outside of Trick Room, great special attack, good coverage, it's got Flamethrower, Ice Beam, T-Bolt, which is handy. But the problem is with Dialga. Dialga and Palkia run very similarly a lot of the time, but Dialga tends to run, it's kind of similar to Groudon and Kyogre, where Dialga tends to run much bulkier sets because its defensive typing is slightly better, and lends itself more to being bulkier, but it doesn't have any recovery, which means that the bulkier sets will eventually just die, right? If you can just chip them enough, you can go death by 1,000 cuts on Dialga. And because its offensive stabs aren't great, it's got like Draco Meteor and Flash Cannon as its offensive stabs, and neither of those are fantastic. Like, it's just not doing enough damage, I think, a lot of the time. The items you'd expect, either Adamant Orb or Life Orb for offensive sets. What Adamant Orb does, for anyone who doesn't know, it's a Dialga specific item, and it boosts the power of Dialga's Dragon and Steel attacks by 1.2 times, which is kind of handy. Or if you're running a more defensive set, I think Shooker or Choppleberry are probably going to be quite common on Dialga. Not that Dialga's going to be common, but on Dialga, they will be common items. Just to get around ground moves from like Landorus. Choppleberry gets around fighting moves from Urshifu or Zacian, stuff like that. Like I said, Palkia plays kind of similarly. Very similar move pool in terms of coverage. The coverage is really good for a water type, but the thing with Palkia is it doesn't really play like a water type, because its only like good offensive water move is Hydro Pump, and that's very unreliable. Which I think is one of the biggest downsides of Palkia. Like, in theory, a water type that's resistant to grass, it can hit things with Flamethrower, it should be really good. But because it can't really function that well as a water type, I think it just kind of falls behind. It's great into some matchups as well, like it beats Kyogre, beats Ho-Oh pretty handily, but like into Xerneas, into Zacian if it's running Play Rough, Wild Charge, to be honest, it kind of sucks. Generally, you'll be running Palkia a lot more offensively. Think Life Orb, Lustrous Orb, Choice Specs, that kind of thing. Yeah, these two, I put these in, and having thought about it a bit more, don't know if they necessarily deserve to be in there over something like Necrozma Forms or whatever. But here they are, now you know. And lastly, Eternatus, I think, is a very interesting Pokemon in this metagame. This thing's got ridiculously good stats. Like, it's got base 130 speed, I think it's 145 special attack. Its defenses aren't great, but it's got like 140 something base HP. Like, this thing's, the base stat total is huge. Great offensive move pool. It's got Dynamax Cannon as its stab move, which is 0 drawback, so it's 100% accurate. Base 100 power is pretty nice, and then like Flamethrower and Sludge Bomb cover Steel and Fairy respectively. Sludge Bomb obviously has stab, which is nice. Has access to Recover and Cosmic Power, which is pretty handy. You can run a defensive set because it's, like I said, it's very bulky, and because it's fast, it can set up a Cosmic Power before things can hit it. which is pretty useful. The thing I think that holds it back the most is the fact that its matchups into restricted Pokemon generally aren't that great. So like Zacian, it doesn't do that well into. Xerneas, you'd think it would do well into Xerneas, but if it can't hit Xerneas with a Sludge Bomb before it sets with Geomancy, it doesn't really do that well into Xerneas. Doesn't like Groudon, doesn't really like either Calyrex form. I think of the kind of A and S tier Pokemon, Kyogre is the only one that it really has a decent matchup into. The biggest benefit though is its matchups into non-restricted Pokemon, so things like Incineroar, Rillaboom, Regieleki, Urshifu it has good matchups into, which it can kind of abuse to an extent. In terms of sets, I think Black Sludge would be the most common item. It was in Series 8 certainly. Even on offensive sets, having Black Sludge is pretty handy for this thing. Or you could see it on the Cosmic Power Recover set. Otherwise, you see stuff like Life Orb Choice Specs. Power Herb as well is a thing for Meteor Beam sets. I've seen Meteor Beam run on this thing. Also gives it a really good way of beating Incin, if you want to. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is what I call the big four unrestricted Pokemon. These, I think, will be far and away the most common Pokemon in the format. Or the most common unrestricted Pokemon in the format. It's already shaping up that way, and I don't think that trend's gonna change. I'm not going to go into too much detail because they function similarly to how they have done in previous formats, but I'll kind of glance over why they're so good in this format in particular. So the first one is Incineroar. This thing I'm almost certain will be the most popular Pokemon in the format for the entire length of the format. Great defensive typing, great bulk, and the key thing with Incin is it has this a very nasty pivoting combo where you can, like, when it enters the field it gets Intimidate, obviously, so it drops attack. It can Fake Out, so it's encouraged to keep pivoting in and out, and it has access to maybe the best pivoting move in the game in Parting Shot. Because between Parting Shot, Fake Out, and Intimidate, you can just kind of neuter Pokemon over and over and over again. You can kind of bring it in, Fake Out, then you can Parting Shot out to weaken a Pokemon, and then you can bring it back in, Intimidate, weaken it again, which gives you access to another Fake Out. You can Parting Shot off. It's absurd. The kind of revolving door of Incineroar is insane. Has great matchups into some of the stronger restricted Pokemon. Like Zacian, both Calyrex forms. It's okay into Groudon. It doesn't really want to tangle with Kyogre, I'll be honest. But yeah, it's okay-ish into Xerneas. It has access to Fake Out. It can Party Shot off it on the turn. It sets up Geomancy just to neuter a bit, and then come back in. So it's not the worst. Yeah, it's got good matchups into a lot of top Pokemon, and it's just an absolute menace when it starts cycling. Rillaboom also benefits from Fake Out buffs this generation. Same thing as Incineroar, where it has access to Fake Out, has a pivoting move in U-turn. I think most Rillaboom are going to run U-turn this format. And it has like an effect when entering the battlefield. It's not quite as good as Incineroar's, but St. Grass Terrain is nice. Especially on when you want to be cycling Fake Outs, being able to get rid of Psychic Terrain is really useful, because that blocks Fake Out, obviously. It's great to Kyogre, obviously, one-shots it with a priority move. It's pretty good to Xerneas as well. One thing that you can do to get around Xerneas after it's set up is like strong priority attacks or physical attacks, and Grassy Glide's a great example of that. You can just kind of chip Xerneas down with that. Another big thing for Rillaboom is Max Airstream in Dynamax formats is, I would say, the best max move. I don't know a huge amount of people who disagree with that. And with no Max Airstream around, that flying weakness on Rillaboom suddenly becomes a lot less of a problem. In terms of items, you're mostly going to see Assault Vest and Miracle Seed, I think. I think given how good U-turn is in this format, I could see Assault Vest picking up. There's less need for Protect without Dynamax, because you don't need to block Dynamax moves. Miracle Seed could also see play, but I think Miracle Seed sets don't generally, if you're running like Fake Out and Protect, don't often have room for a U-turn. So I think Assault Vest is probably going to be more common for that reason. Choice Band's been common in previous formats as well. I don't think that's going to be the case in this one though, personally, just because U-turn and Fake Out are so valuable. The other two of the big four, first of all, Regieleki, fastest Pokemon in the game, right? This thing hasn't really changed since the last format at all, but it's the fastest Pokemon in the game. It's got Electro buff, great speed stat, and without Max Airstream, Regieleki is now one of the best forms of speed control, especially given that it outspeeds Zacian and Calyrex. The only other Pokemon that do that are Ninjask and Pheromosa, and both of those are kind of crap. Has access to pivoting and volt switch. You're starting to see a theme here, I'm sure. Hits pretty hard with electric type attacks thanks to transistor. It's very frail, but again, it's moving so fast, and without Dynamax, it's oh. I forgot to shuffle my music, or to loop my music. Sorry, that was a big change in vibe. There we go. We're back to lo-fi. That's my bad. Oh, I'm a very good YouTuber. Yeah, it's very frail, but I think that's less of an issue in a non-Dynamax format. Certainly in what I found when I've been playing it in Series 10. And that is because without Dynamax, things can't Dynamax just to eat a hit from Regieleki and immediately kill it. So being very fast and having access to pivoting means that you can often get it out before it needs to take a hit, which is pretty useful. I think Magnet's going to be the most common item. Life Orb and Choice Specs could be common as well. Focus Sash, maybe. I think Sash is probably going to see more play on other Pokemon in this format. I think Tailwind Setters, Urshifu, that kind of stuff. But it's an option on Lecky. Urshifu, I think, is maybe the biggest change between previous formats and this one, because without Dynamax, there are so few defensive options against it. Because obviously you can't protect against any of its attacks now without Max Guard, which makes it absolutely terrifying. And you also can't just double your bulk to tank a hit from it. I've got a list of things on the screen for Urshifu here, but I mean most of them are the same as in previous formats. The big thing is now that it you just can't protect against any of its attacks, which is insane, absolutely insane. The thing is a menace and I hate it. Next thing I'm going to talk about are kind of the biggest improvers in the format. So I think these are the Pokemon that have kind of are now much more viable than they were in previous formats. I'm not going to go over every single Pokemon that's in the top 30 in usage or whatever. I'm just going to go over the ones that I've seen the biggest changes. First one, kind of interesting, Mienshao gets very fast Fake Out, which is useful in this format as we've been over. Inner Focus is also a really good ability in this format because of the prevalence of Incineroar, which has Intimidate and Fake Out. Inner Focus makes you immune to both of those, so it's pretty good for dealing with Incin. It's access to Wide Guard, Quick Guard, Taunt, U-Turn. It's got decent support options, hits relatively hard with close combat. It is very frail, but you can stick a Sash on it. So yeah, that's the key appeal of Mienshao. It's not going to be metagame breaking, but I think it's kind of it's a nice Pokemon in this format. It's got much more of a niche than it previously has. Could maybe see some use. Galarian Zapdos, I think, is one of the biggest ones. There have been a few Series 10 tournaments so far, and I think Zapdos has won a couple of them. What I was talking about earlier, Defiant users to punish Intimidate on Zacian. Zapdos is here, so you could probably see this next to Zacian a fair bit. Got great offensive stab moves in Flying and Fighting, both really good offensive types. Has access to moves like Quick Guard, Taunt, Coaching. I think the most common set you're going to see on this now is going to be Brave Bird, Thunderous Kick or Close Combat, and then Quick Guard and Detect. But it's got other options. Can run Lum, Life Orb, Goggles, same items it used to run. Could also see Scarf on it now. I don't think that'll necessarily be that common because it wants to have access to Quick Guard a lot of the time, but it's there if you want it. You can always go for Scarf Coaching. Volcarona is another big up and comer. I think I mentioned it briefly when I was talking about Xerneas, but it's a redirection that is resistant to Steel, which is super useful because most other redirection Pokemon are Fairy type, I believe, apart from I think Amoonguss and Indeedee, the only exceptions, but those are both neutral to Steel. So it's got redirection, it's resistant to Steel, has Flame Body, which means it's very risky to try and throw a Zacian attack out when Volcarona's there. Again, same as Rillaboom, lack of max Airstream helps Volcarona. It's got good damage reduction with Struggle Bug and Will-O-Wisp. It's not the bulkiest, but I've seen, even I was toying around with EV spreads on this a day or two ago, and you can make spreads that'll live 2 Behemoth Blades with a Citrus Berry or something like that. Generally, you're going to see this supportive. I think it's usually going to be next to Xerneas as a Rage Powder user, but I think that's a really solid niche for Volcarona now, especially since it's faster than Urshifu and can Will-O-Wisp. which is very, very valuable in this format, I think. Hitmontop. Hitmontop has won the World Championships in a restricted format before. Very good Pokemon in previous formats. I think the existence of its Incineroar makes it less good, because it kind of wants to do the same thing in terms of like cycling Intimidate and faking out, but it doesn't have access to pivoting, which hurts it a lot when you compare it to Incin. The biggest upsides are Wide Guard and Quick Guard, which Incin doesn't get. But yeah, similar role, but a couple of differences. It's not going to be as popular as Incineroar by any means, but it's got uses. Celesteela, before you say anything, yes, I know that Celesteela was huge in Series 9, but I put it on here because the sets it's going to be running are very different. Like previously, it could run offensive sets, which it could get away with because of Dynamax. It would have access to Stab Max Airstream, Big Max Steel Spikes, that kind of thing, whereas now its stab moves are like Air Slash and Flash Cannon, which aren't that good. So I think Celesteela is going to pivot a lot more to running defensive sets. Wide Guard now it has access to is really good in this format, as I've been over. And the other one is Heavy Slam is now a viable move. Celesteela will hit most things for max damage with Heavy Slam. So I feel like I should have explained this earlier, but for anyone who doesn't know, the way Heavy Slam works is the heavier you are in comparison to the target, the more damage it does. I think it's multiplicative. So if you're like between some range of multipliers heavier, it'll be 60 and then 80, 100, and then it caps out at 120. So against, I think most of the format, you're hitting them with a 120 base power stab move, which is very, very useful. It's a great Xerneas answer, because like I said, it's got Wide Guard to stop it from hitting the partner with Gleam. I mean, you can still Moonblast the partner, but whatever. I think it one-shots it with Heavy Slam. You might want to double check that, I could be wrong, but I think with a bit of investment it could do. The other big thing for Celesteela, particularly for defensive sets, is without Dynamax, the kind of Leech Seed Protect leftovers stall is a lot more effective, because you can't do damage through Protect against it, so Protect is a free turn of recovery. Well, not free, it depends, your opponent could like read it and set up or whatever, but it's more free, certainly. And also, there are no like max Darknesses, max Ghosts going around to drop its defensive stats, which means it can live a bit longer. Aegislash, another interesting one. Again, a Pokemon you probably, if you're new to competitive in Generation 8, maybe wouldn't have seen before. Certainly not much. But the gimmick it has an ability called... What's its ability called? I think it's just called Stance Change. But its base form, or its shield form, has really good defenses. Like, it's base 140 in both defenses. I think it's decent HP. I can't remember what its HP stat is. No, its HP is quite low. But either way... And then every time it uses an offensive move, it switches into its Blade form, where it swaps its defenses and its offenses. So it goes down to like base 50 in all of its defense, in both of its defenses, but 140 in both of its attacking stats. And then when it uses King Shield, which is like Protect, except it doesn't block against status moves, but anything that hits it with a contact move drops one stage of attack. A weird move. But basically it can switch between forms. And in a Dynamax format, that sucked, because you could never Dynamax it, because the second you Dynamax it, it's frail as hell, it's not that fast, it'll die. Because it can't King Shield if it's maxed. So I think this could maybe have a bit of a resurgence. Like, it's a solid steel type, has access to a Wide Guard, it's got good stabs in Steel and Ghost, doesn't really have any coverage, but it doesn't really need it. Generally the set you're going to see is it's going to be King's Guard, Dual Stab, and then the flex slot will be Wide Guard, Sub, Sword Stance if you're running physical, but I don't think many will. It's likely to be Wide Guard or Sub. The reason Sub's good on this is because you can set up a Sub in Shield form without changing into Blade form, and then the Sub can protect you when you are in Blade form, which is kind of handy. Most of them run leftovers, I think, particularly if they're running Sub. I've seen Life Orb, I've seen Sash. But again, there's not much data from this generation going for Aegislash, so I'm kind of basing this off when I last saw it in competitive. So I think that has potentially a space in the metagame. Next up, Tabulele. Tabulele, I think, now has more of a use over Indeedee because of or Indeedee female certainly, as a psychic terrain setter, because of the lack of like max airstreams going around. Suddenly a base 95 speed stat, I know there's a lot of really fast stuff in this format, but suddenly there's a base 95 speed stat suddenly becomes a lot more useful, especially in a restricted format where a lot of stuff hovers around kind of 90-ish as its speed. So it's a relatively fast attacker that can block fake out other priority moves, which is really useful. Also, its attacks are just super powerful when they're boosted by psychic terrain. Although it does suffer a lot if the opponent can outspeed it, because it's not that bulky. Combat sets, it'll almost always be offensive. Like on like a Life Orb set, you might see probably see Psychic, and then either Moonblast or Dazzling Gleam, potentially both. Definitely Protect, and then like Taunt in the last slot or whatever. Or it can run choice items. Specs. Scarf gets around the bad speed, which, like I said, in the Dynamax format, choice items are a lot more viable, I think. So having like a Scarf Lele means that you can Scarf it and it can't get hit by priority moves, which is kind of useful. Gothitelle, I'll go over Gothitelle in a bit more detail in the next section, but Gothitelle's a bit scary because of its ability Shadow Tag, which traps in the opponent's Pokemon so they can't switch. So that combined with Fake Out makes it kind of a scary lead, because if you lead badly against Gothitelle, you're in a really bad position. Has good support options. It's got, like I said, Fake Out, it's got Trick Room, Taunt. It's got Ally Switch if you don't like having friends. It's got Helping Hand. The biggest issue with Gothitelle, I think, is that it's very passive. Like, it's not really got any good attacks, so you often, like, Gothitelle sets just won't run attacking moves, which makes it huge taunt bait. And even if it's not taunt bait, like, people would run, like, Hypnosis on Gothitelle just because, like, it's a Hail Mary, I've got nothing better to do option. So it can get into situations where it's kind of just there. Serena's an interesting one. I think Serena's going to be mostly on Kyogre teams, but its ability Queenly Majesty blocks you and your partner from being hit by priority moves. It's basically like a permanent quick guard as long as Serena's on the field, which is super good into Rillaboom in particular, which is why it's useful next to Kyogre. But it also stops Fake Out, which is nice in this format. Great offensive move pool, kind of standard offensive set. You'll see like Power Whip, High Jump Kick, and Triple Axle. All very good moves, but very inaccurate, which means you'll often see like Wide Lens on Serena, which is kind of a useful item on it. Or it can run a slightly more, I say defensive, it's not really got the bulk to be defensive, but a kind of more supportive-ish set. You can run like Taunt, its signature move Trop Kick is, I think, base 70 power, and it's guaranteed attack drop on the target, which is kind of useful. It has Helping Hand, can pivot with U-turn, so it's got some options. I personally prefer the offensive set, especially if you're running it on a kind of hyper-offensive rain team. Yeah, the biggest issue is it's got very underwhelming stats. It's got a good attack stat, but you can intimidate it with Incineroar. Its speed's not great, its bulk's not great. The biggest thing you use it for is its ability, for sure. Entei has base 100 speed, which is huge for getting around Urshifu, especially when you've got Sacred Fire. You can threaten to burn Urshifu straight off the bat. Even Water Urshifu doesn't necessarily want to take a Sacred Fire from Entei, just because if it gets burned, it's kind of in a really awful spot. Inner Focus, like I said, with Mienshao is a really good ability this format, because it can't be intimidated, can't be faked out. It has access to things like Snarl. It's got extreme speed, which is a really good priority. So it's got solid move pool, or solid enough. It can scrounge together a move pool. It's a bit shallow sometimes, kind of beyond Sacred Fire, Snarl, extreme speed. Like if you want to run an Assault Vest set, you're stuck with like Bulldoze or Stone Edge. So its move pool's a bit shallow, which I think is maybe one of the biggest issues with it. Yeah, it's solid bulk. Fire typing is good into like Yveltal's, not Yveltal, sorry. Zacian, Xerneas, that kind of stuff. Sacred Fire is a great move. Like I said, good priority Snarl. So it's a decent Pokemon. I think it has a niche. It's not going to be that great. I did some testing with it earlier and I found it a little underwhelming, but maybe I was just using it wrong. It happens. Landorus Incarnate. This thing is base 101 speed, so like I said with Entei, like that's a really good speed tier for restricted formats, because most restricteds sit around kind of 90 to 95, some are 100, like Palkia. Urshifu's at 97. So it's a really good speed tier in this metagame. Obviously there are things like Calyrex and Zacian that will just outspeed it. But it's got Sheer Force, and generally the set you'll see on Landorus Incarnate is Sheer Force and Life Orb. The way those two interact is a bit weird, because what Sheer Force does is when you hit an opponent with an offensive move, it checks to see if the offensive move has a secondary effect, and if it does, it removes all secondary effects and gives it a 1.3 times power boost. But the way that interacts with Life Orb is slightly odd, because if you hit someone with a move that doesn't have a secondary effect, you will take Life Orb Recall with Landorus, or with any Sheer Force Pokemon. But if you hit someone with a move that does have a secondary effect, like I said, the game, I think, checks to see if there's a secondary effect on the attack. Says, yes, there is a secondary effect on this attack. Let's remove all secondary effects from this. And then the Life Orb recoil damage is counted as a secondary effect, but the extra damage isn't. So you get the damage, but none of the recoil from Life Orb if you use a move that's boosted by Sheer Force. It's very odd, but like it's clearly intentional because it's been in the game for a few generations. But yeah, basically the gist of it is this thing hits very hard because it gets a Life Orb boost and a Sheer Force boost on all its attacks, which combined is maths. It's like, one sec, I'm going to do this now. I probably should have done this beforehand, but what is 1.3 times 1.3? Oh, I can do that in my head. It's just under 1.7, it's 1.69. It's just 13 squared, can't do maths. Yeah, so you get like a 1.7 times boost on all your attacks, which is nuts. So plus like Earth Power gives you a really good stab. It's got Sludge Bomb. I've seen people run mixed sets with like Rock Slide. You can run Psychic if you really want to. It's not very good, but you can. The big issue is it's not got any good Flying Stab. It's got no special Flying Stab, and its only physical Flying Stab is Fly. Like Landorus Landorus Therian was running that in Dynamax metagames, as you saw, just because it was the best Flying Stab it had. It's also not very bulky. Landorus, like I think all of its defensive stats are below 100, so it can, like, it'll just drop like a Zacian hit or whatever. So you got to be careful playing around. If you can get it into the right position, if you can get it with speed control up, then it's super good. Very, very powerful. The reason it didn't see much play in Dynamax metagames is because Sheer Force doesn't work with Dynamax. So it was in a weird position where Dynamaxing it would often like not really boost the power of its attacks at all. The last Pokemon I want to highlight here is Tapu Koko. It's a very fast Fairy type, which makes it really good to Urshifu. It gives you terrain control, which is nice. Like if you're running Fake Out Pokemon, it can get rid of Psychic terrain. It can get rid of Rillaboom's grassy terrain if you're scared of grass type attacks. A couple of decent options in terms of sets. You can run offense with like Life Orb. You can run support. It's got decent support options like Taunt, Nature's Madness, Electro for speed control. You can run Assault Vest. If you've been keeping up with my YouTube videos or with my streams, you'll have seen that I've used Assault Vest Tapu Koko in Series 9. Really enjoy it. The biggest issue I think is because it is that it competes directly with Regieleki as like a fast electric type, and I think compared with how it is in Series 9, the extra offensive power of a lot of Pokemon it's facing off against means that it's not quite as good as its kind of bulky support role, but it has a niche. As a terrain setter, a fast Fairy electric type is nice because it gives you like fast speed control and it can take on Urshifu. So it's not terrible. Again, not going to break the metagame, but it's an option. It's good. It's there. So next I'm going to go over a few common cores. Like I said, I'm going to focus on ones that involve restricted Pokemon, just because the ones that don't are ones that have been around for a while. So the key ones. First of all, the one that everyone was scared of going into this format. I can't speak. Gothitelle, Urshifu, and Zacian as a core, right? The reason this is so scary is because Gothitelle and Urshifu as a lead, either Urshifu, just kind of removes all your defensive options. Because you can't switch, obviously, because of Gothitelle's Shadow Tag. And normally you could get around, like, because Gothitelle's Fake Out, normally you get around that by protecting, but obviously Urshifu hits through Protect. So a lot of the time, if you, like, particularly if you lead badly into it, you can just go, like, Gothitelle can Fake Out, and then Urshifu can, like, Wicked Blow into one spot, and it'll just checkmate that Pokemon, because you can't stop yourself getting faked out with Protect, because you just get hit through Protect by Urshifu. So it's very scary. Like, you do need to have a way to get around this if you're team building. And then Zacian in the back, Turbo Speed. If your opponent, like, if you get the wrong Pokemon stuck on the field because of Gothittelle's ability against a Zacian, it will set up on you and you'll lose. And also it covers Fairy types really well, which is like the one thing that Urshifu struggles against the most. So kind of these three here make it very difficult to lead. And if you lead wrong, you will almost certainly get punished hard for it. The ways to beat it, none of these are guaranteed by any means, but like faster fake outs than Gothitels can be nice because it stops that checkmate moment, so you can fake out the Urshifu before Gothitelle fakes you out. Whereas with slower fake out users, Gothitelle can fake out your fake out user, and then Urshifu can just hit you, right? Which is why having a faster fake out is useful. Again, if you can stop the checkmate with like Quick Guard, Serena can do decently into it because of Queenly Majesty, Psychic Drain's decent into it. Those can get around the fake out. I will say you've got to be careful because a lot of Pokemon that have access to Psychic Drain or Quick Guard or whatever don't like dealing with Urshifu. So that's definitely something you need to be wary of. But if your partner can deal with it, then it's pretty solid. I guess the issue is trying to deal with Urshifu and Zacian as potential leads. The next one is Xerneas setup. I've kind of got over this a little bit, but like the kind of standard Xerneas setup in past generations was Xerneas Amoonguss and Incin. Now we start to see a lot of Xerneas, Volcarona, Rillaboom. Volcarona does well next to Xerneas because, like I said, it eats hits from Zacian, which is, I think, the biggest reason it's now seeing use over Amoonguss. And it has Stab, Heat Wave, or Flamethrower, or whatever fire move you want to beat steel types that resist Xerneas, which is nice. But yeah, the goal of this team is just to try and get a Xerneas Geomancy up. Ways to get around it. Like I said, you can stop it in the first place. I think that the answers to these cores are kind of similar to what I said for answers to Xerneas. So like Taunt, Fake Out, Encore can stop or punish setup, or you can remove the setup. Haze, Clear Smog, and Amoonguss does well into this because Amoonguss gets around redirection from Volcarona and opposing Amoonguss. So it's a grass type. I say steel types are really good checks, in particular Kartana and Ferrothorn ignore Rage Powder, which is nice, so they can just like one-shot Xerneas through Rage Powder if they want to, but your opponent will obviously play around that. And you need to be very scared of Volcarona just hitting you with a fire move and one-shotting you. I think I mentioned this briefly with Rillaboom as well, in that kind of strong physical priority attacks can take out Xerneas once it's set up. Rillaboom is really good at it. I toyed around with Scizor for a bit when I was first starting this format. I think I kind of enjoyed using that. So stuff like that's decent for getting rid of Xerneas. Or you can go for like phasing with like Roar or whatever, but it's very hard to get one of those off before Xerneas hits you. So, and again, I glanced over this briefly earlier when I went over Calyrex, but Calyrex and Indeedee is kind of a common core. You'll often see that backed up with like Urshifu. I think is quite common on those teams. But yeah, Indeedee keeps Calyrex safe with Follow Me. Psychic Drain stops things like Sucker Punch on opposing Urshifu. And it boosts up the Calyrex's expanding force, which is nice. And obviously having Follow Me means that Calyrex can set up a lot more easily. As I said earlier, Dark types are the best checks, but with stuff like Urshifu and Fairy types on the team, you need to be careful with it. Like, the thing with a lot of these is it's very easy to come up with a solution in a vacuum, but coming up with a solution that works when there are more than just two Pokemon on the opponent's team becomes a bit more tricky. The other thing you can do to get around the redirection is spread moves. A lot of strong, like physical spread moves in particular, can get around Indeedee's Follow Me, and Calyrex isn't that bulky, so it'll go down to them eventually, especially if it's taking the Life Orb recoil. Particular moves like Snarl, or Fire Wrath if you want to run Moltres. I don't think Moltres is that good this format without Dynamax, but like spread Dark type moves are really good into it. So those are options. And then the last two I want to go over are Rain and Sun. So Tornoga, you'll all have seen this in previous formats. Well, I say previous formats in Series 8 specifically. The trick is you want to set up Tailwind and press Water Spout, just hit things with Kyogre, right? Tornadus' Hurricane is good against grass types, so that gives you a threat against Rillaboom and that kind of stuff. And obviously with Kyogre's Rain, Hurricane can't miss, so you've just got a base 110 stab, coming off a pretty good special attack stat on Tornadus, honestly. Tornadus also has good support options in like Taunt. It can run Icy Wind for good speed control as well, once you've got Tailwind up, which can be useful. In terms of getting around it, grass types, like I said, are good, but you need to be careful of Hurricane and Thunderous. You also need to watch out, if you're running Rillaboom in particular, for Serena is often seen on these teams. Ice Beam on Kyogre can deal with grass types moderately well, so just be careful of those. And also just opposing speed control. So things like opposing Tailwinds mean that Kyogre can't necessarily get into a position where it's the fastest thing on the field. Regieleki's great into it. Kyogre can run enough speed to outspeed Regieleki under Tailwind, but again, if you get like an Electro off or something before they can do that, then you outspeed it again, which is nice. Or you can just, if you can manage to stall out their Tailwind, like he comes in and is faster than Kyogre. Those are kind of your key answers to it, but this core is very scary, I think. Like I said earlier, I think Kyogre is going to be one of the top 3 Pokemon in this format, which you need to be wary of. And then the other one is Groudon Sun. This I think is gonna function kind of similarly to how it did in the Series 8. I think less good though, just because you can't G-Max your Venusaur. Again, Venusaur and Lilligant are just fast Sleep Powder users, which let Groudon set up or just launch P-Blades. They cover water types well. I think I mentioned a lot of this earlier in potential partners for Groudon. Yeah, oh, Pollen Puff was the move I was forgetting on Lilligant. Yeah, Lilligant's Pollen Puff is part of his supportive kit. In terms of countering particularly Groudon Sun, rather than just Groudon itself in a vacuum, things like Lumberry or Safety Goggles are great for getting around Sleep Powders. If you can deal with the Chlorophyll Pokemon, you can deal with Groudon with water types. Opposing Weather's good to slow down the Chlorophyll Pokemon because neither of them are particularly fast outside of Sun. You can, like Grass types are good into it. Again, if you need to play around Fire Punch on Groudon, you need to play around Sludge Bomb with Venusaur, but Grass types can be good into these just because they can't get slept with Sleep Powder. They hit Groudon super effectively. Yeah, but I kind of generally your solutions to Sun. I don't think it's going to be as scary this format as it has in previous formats, but kind of if you want like an immediate like slap a band-aid on it thing, Safety Goggles is good, Lumberry's good. Yeah, that's all for kind of the cores and everything I'm going to go over. To summarise, Zacian, I'm fairly certain that's going to be the most common restricted Pokemon in the format. That thing's broken. Xerneas Kyogre I think will be the next two. I think those are kind of the 3 S tier restricteds. I expect the big four, the big 4 non-restricted Pokemon in Incin, Rillaboom, Eleki, Urshifu, those are going to be everywhere. Like, genuinely, I think those 4 and Zacian are a strong team already. Slap a 6th on there, it could be like Gothitelle or something. I'd be tempted to stick on something with A, because then you could call it the Azuri core, which is kind of fun. But that's not really an optimal Pokemon thing, that's just me having fun. But yeah, those 4 in Zacian are just kind of a team by themselves. So you need to be prepped for those, certainly going to this format. And also, please note that this whole video, like, I know I've got a relatively well-informed opinion. I like to think I'm quite good at the game. But these are fundamentally just one person's opinions. And it's one video. I've not been able to cover everything. So there are Pokemon that will have improved a lot recently that I've missed. In the little section I did when I went over improved Pokemon. There will almost certainly be things I get wrong in this video as well, with the benefit of hindsight. Like in the video I did when Crown Tundra came out, I said Spectria was going to be rubbish and no one was ever going to use it, and ended up being broken. I also said that Regieleki wouldn't be that strong and that Regidrago would suck. And neither of those were true. So don't take this as gospel. Obviously they're under new Pokemon, so it's a bit more informed than kind of speculating on newer Pokemon. But yeah, that's kind of it for this video. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully it's been helpful. Like I said, if you have any questions, I know this is a lot to take in. Like I said, I've missed stuff out. There are details I've kind of glossed over very quickly. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I will try and get to them as soon as I can. If you enjoyed the content, please do like the video, sub to the channel. Like I said, that lets me know that this is content that people enjoy. Or if you enjoy the content and want to see more of it, just comment that you want to see more of it. Honestly, easiest way for me to know. Yeah, if you want to see more content like this, kind of more educational stuff rather than battle videos, then show some support on this video. That'll give me the idea that this is something that people are interested in. And also go follow me on Twitch. I stream a few times a week. I'm probably be back as of when this video is posted on Tuesday. So go follow me on Twitch. Link to that is in the description. And yeah, that is all. Thank you for sitting through this with me. I know it's been a very long video. I'm like an hour and 20 in, but there is a lot of information to go over. I will put timestamps in and stuff. So that I realise saying that at the end of the video doesn't actually help, but there'll be timestamps so people can jump through it to find bits that are more relevant. But yeah, thank you all for putting up with me for an hour and 20 minutes if you made it to the end of this video. And I will see you all in the next video. Bye bye.